The autumn sun cast long shadows across the terminal as Catherine Reynolds walked through the crowded airport. Her carry-on bag rolled quietly behind her, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She glanced at her boarding pass once more. Flight 2173 to Washington, D.C., seat 12F. Window seat, just as she preferred. Catherine was neither tall nor short, her frame lean but strong. At 53, her once dark hair now carried streaks of silver that caught the light as she moved. She wore simple clothes, dark blue jeans, a light gray sweater, and comfortable walking shoes. Nothing about her appearance drew attention, which was exactly how she wanted it. Final boarding call for Flight 2173 to Washington, D.C. The announcement echoed through the terminal. Catherine quickened her pace slightly, reaching the gate just as the attendant was about to close it. "Cutting it close today," the gate agent said with a smile, scanning her boarding pass. "Better late than never," Catherine replied, her voice warm but somehow carrying a natural authority that made the agent straighten up just a bit. The jetway stretched before her like a tunnel, the sounds of her footsteps mixing with the mechanical hum of the airport. As she approached the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeted her with the practiced smile of someone who had already welcomed 100 passengers. "Welcome aboard. Seat 12F is down to your right, about halfway down the cabin." Catherine nodded her thanks and stepped into the crowded airplane. The narrow aisle was clogged with passengers still settling in, stowing bags and adjusting seats. She waited patiently, observing the small dramas playing out around her. A mother trying to settle an energetic child, an older couple helping each other with their seatbelts, two businessmen already deep in conversation about quarterly reports. When the path cleared, Catherine made her way to row 12. A heavy-set man occupied the aisle seat, while a college-age girl with headphones sat in the middle, eyes glued to her phone. "Excuse me," Catherine said. The man sighed dramatically before standing to let her pass. The girl remained oblivious until the man tapped her shoulder, prompting a startled removal of her headphones. "Sorry," the girl mumbled, unbuckling and stepping into the aisle to let Catherine through. Catherine settled into seat 12F, placing her backpack under the seat in front of her. The window offered a view of airport workers loading luggage into the plane's belly and fueling trucks pulling away. She pulled out a paperback book, a historical biography that looked well read, and placed it in her lap without opening it. From her window, she noticed a small delay forming. Extra ground crew had surrounded one of the engines, pointing and consulting tablets. Catherine checked her watch, a simple analog timepiece with a leather band. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her expression remained calm. The plane's intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor technical delay. Nothing to worry about, but we'll need about 20 minutes to complete some additional checks. We appreciate your patience and we'll have you on your way as soon as possible." A collective groan rose from the passengers. The man in the aisle seat muttered something about always something with this airline, while the girl in the middle immediately returned to her phone, fingers tapping rapidly to share the news of her delay. Catherine remained still, her face betraying nothing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone, not the latest model, but not outdated either. She typed a brief message, waited for a response, then put the phone away. Whatever news she had received, it didn't change her composed demeanor. "First time to D.C.? The question came from the girl in the middle seat, who had apparently decided that conversation was better than sitting in silent frustration. "No," Catherine replied with a small smile. "I've been many times. Business or pleasure?" the girl asked, removing her headphones completely now. "A bit of both, I suppose." Catherine's answer was friendly but gave away little. "How about you?" "Visiting my aunt. She works at the Smithsonian, so I get free tours of all the cool stuff behind the scenes." The girl's enthusiasm was genuine. "I'm Lynn, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Lynn. I'm Catherine." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices from the front of the cabin. A passenger was arguing with a flight attendant, his voice growing louder with each exchange. "We've been sitting here for 15 minutes already. I have a connection to make." The flight attendant's voice remained professionally calm. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but the safety checks are mandatory. We'll be underway as soon as possible. This is ridiculous. I want to speak to the captain." Other passengers began to shift uncomfortably. The tension in the cabin was rising. Lynn glanced nervously toward the commotion. "Does this happen a lot on flights?" she asked Catherine. More often than you'd think, Catherine answered, her eyes tracking the situation with quiet assessment. People don't handle disruptions well, especially when they feel powerless. The angry passenger's voice continued to escalate. A second flight attendant moved to assist the first. Catherine watched the scene unfold with practiced calmness, noting how the crew positioned themselves, how they maintained professional smiles despite the man's increasing aggression. The plane's door was still open. Catherine spotted the gate agent returning down the jetway, accompanied by what appeared to be a customer service manager. Good protocol, she thought to herself. De-escalate with authority figures when possible. The manager's arrival seemed to calm the situation. The angry passenger, realizing he had drawn an audience of unsympathetic fellow travelers, finally returned to his seat. Conversations resumed throughout the cabin, with the recent drama now providing fresh material for small talk. That was intense, Lynn said, releasing a breath she'd been holding. He'll calm down, Catherine replied. Most people just need to feel heard. Lynn studied Catherine with newfound curiosity. You seem really calm about all this. Are you like a therapist or something? Catherine smiled. No, but I've worked with all types of people. You learn to read situations. Before Lynn could ask more questions, the captain's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, good news. Our mechanics have completed their inspections and we're cleared for departure. Flight attendants prepare for takeoff. A ripple of relief passed through the cabin. Catherine glanced out the window again, watching as the last of the ground crew dispersed. She knew they had been checking the right engine's housing, a routine inspection, but one that could delay flights if anything seemed out of order. The plane began to push back from the gate. Catherine felt the familiar sensation of movement, the slight vibration of the aircraft coming fully alive. Despite having experienced this hundreds of times, she still found herself mentally reviewing the aircraft type, exit locations, and procedures, old habits from years of training. As the safety demonstration began, Catherine noticed how few passengers were actually paying attention. Lynn had her headphones back on. The businessman was already opening his laptop despite the crew's instructions, and most others were staring at phones or magazines. Catherine, however, watched the demonstration with respectful attention. The plane taxied toward the runway, joining a queue of aircraft waiting their turn for takeoff. Catherine could feel the pilots occasionally applying the brakes, the plane jerking slightly as they maintained their position in line. Have you ever been afraid of flying? Lynn asked suddenly, having removed one earbud. Catherine turned from the window. No, but I respect what's involved in getting something this size off the ground. I get nervous during takeoff and landing, Lynn admitted. And turbulence freaks me out. That's natural, Catherine assured her. But commercial air travel is incredibly safe. The training pilots go through is extensive. You know a lot about it? Catherine nodded. I've spent some time around aircraft. The plane turned onto the runway, engine spooling up to a high-pitched whine. Lynn gripped the armrest as the aircraft began to accelerate. Catherine returned her gaze to the window, watching the ground blur as they gained speed. The gentle pressure of takeoff pushed them back into their seats. Catherine felt the familiar sensation of the wheels leaving the ground, the momentary heaviness as the plane began its climb into the sky. Beside her, Lynn had closed her eyes, her knuckles white against the armrests. We're up? Catherine said gently after a moment. Smoothest part of the flight now. Lynn opened one eye, then the other. Thanks, she said with a self-conscious laugh. I know it's silly to be scared. Fear is never silly, Catherine replied. It's just information. The trick is not to let it make decisions for you. As the plane climbed through the clouds, Catherine looked out at the expanding view. The cityscape below grew smaller, buildings turning into miniature models, then merely textures on the landscape. She'd seen this transition countless times from many different aircraft, but this perspective, commercial, ordinary, anonymous, was relatively new to her. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around them, passengers began to settle in for the flight, opening books, unfolding newspapers, adjusting headphones. Catherine finally opened her biography, finding her place with a practiced ease that suggested she'd been reading it in small increments for some time. No, one in the cabin would have guessed that the unassuming woman in seat 12F was anything other than what she appeared to be, just another passenger. The flight had been smooth for nearly an hour. Catherine had settled into her biography, occasionally looking out the window at the vast landscape of clouds below. Lynn had fallen asleep beside her, headphones still playing music that Catherine could faintly hear. The businessman in the aisle seat was working through spreadsheets on his laptop, muttering numbers under his breath. The first hint of trouble came when Catherine noticed a slight change in the engine sound, a subtle shift that most passengers wouldn't detect. She glanced out the window, her trained eyes scanning the wing and engine housing. Nothing visible, but something had changed. The aircraft was beginning to climb, likely to avoid an approaching weather system. Catherine checked her watch, calculating their approximate position based on departure time and speed. They were likely crossing over the Appalachian Mountains, an area known for unpredictable weather patterns this time of year. The captain's voice came over the intercom, confirming her assessment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some weather ahead. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign as we expect some turbulence. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." The flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, collecting trash and checking seatbelts. Catherine gently woke Lynn, who had slept through the announcement. "We're heading into some rough air," Catherine explained, gesturing to her own seatbelt. "Better buckle up." Lynn yawned and secured her belt. "I hate turbulence. How bad is it going to be?" "Hard to say," Catherine replied, her eyes still on the darkening clouds outside. "But this aircraft is designed to handle much worse than anything we're likely to encounter." The businessman beside them closed his laptop with an annoyed sigh. "Just what I need. A bumpy flight when I'm trying to prepare for a presentation." Catherine didn't respond, her attention drawn to the cabin crew. They were moving with increased urgency now, their faces showing concern that went beyond routine turbulence preparations. One flight attendant was on the phone with the cockpit, her expression growing more serious with each passing second. The plane suddenly dipped, then rose sharply. Several passengers gasped. Lynn grabbed Catherine's arm, her knuckles white with fear. "It's all right," Catherine said calmly. "Just air pockets. Like driving on a bumpy road." The turbulence intensified. Overhead bins rattled. A water bottle rolled down the aisle. The plane shuddered, dropped again, and then seemed to hit a wall of rough air that had the entire aircraft bouncing and swaying. The noise level in the cabin increased as passengers reacted with alarm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, noticeably more tense than before. "We've hit some unexpected severe weather. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. This turbulence should pass shortly." A sharp jolt sent an unsecured bag flying from an overhead compartment. Catherine tracked its trajectory, instinctively raising her arm to block it from hitting Lynn. The move was quick and precise, almost too precise for someone who claimed to be an ordinary passenger. "Thanks," Lynn said, wide-eyed. "How did you react so fast?" "Just lucky timing," Catherine replied. But her attention had already shifted to a commotion several rows ahead. An elderly man was slumped in his seat. The woman beside him was calling for help, her voice barely audible over the noise of the turbulence and the rattling aircraft. "Flight attendant, please, something's wrong with my husband." The nearest flight attendant, already struggling to maintain her balance in the bucking plane, made her way to the couple. Catherine watched intently as the crew member checked the man's responsiveness. "Is there a doctor on board?" The flight attendant called out, her voice professionally calm but edged with urgency. No one responded immediately. The plane lurched again, sending the flight attendant tumbling into the aisle. She caught herself against a seat, wincing in pain. Catherine unbuckled her seatbelt. "What are you doing?" Lynn asked, still clinging to her armrest. "Stay here," Catherine instructed, her voice suddenly carrying a tone of command that hadn't been there before. She made her way forward against the bucking motion of the aircraft. Her movements balanced and sure despite the turbulence. Reaching the flight attendant, who was now struggling to stand, Catherine helped her up with a firm but gentle grip. "I have medical training," she said simply. "Let me take a look at him." The flight attendant, surprised by the confidence radiating from this previously unremarkable passenger, nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. I think he might be having a heart attack." Catherine moved to the elderly man, who was pale and sweating profusely. His wife looked up at Catherine with desperate hope. "Please help him. He said his chest hurts and then he couldn't talk anymore." Catherine knelt in the aisle, bracing herself against the seats as the plane continued to rock. Her assessment of the man was quick and methodical. She checked his pulse at his neck, observed his breathing pattern and lifted his eyelids to check his pupils. "How long has he been like this?" she asked the wife. "Just a few minutes." He was fine, and then the turbulence started and he got so scared. Catherine turned to the flight attendant. "Do you have a medical kit on board?" "Yes, at the back." "I'll get it." "And an AED?" The flight attendant nodded, slightly surprised at Catherine's knowledge of standard aircraft equipment. "Get both, and inform the captain that we have a passenger experiencing a possible cardiac event. Ask if there's a closer airport we can divert to. This turbulence isn't helping his condition." The flight attendant hesitated for a split second, unused to taking such specific orders from a passenger, but something in Catherine's tone, a natural authority that seemed to cut through the chaos of the moment, had her nodding and hurrying toward the back of the plane. Catherine returned her attention to the elderly man. She loosened his collar and belt, then spoke clearly to his wife. "What's his name?" "Robert." "I'm Helen." "Robert," Catherine said firmly, patting his cheek. "Robert, can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered. A weak groan escaped his lips. "Good. Stay with me, Robert." Catherine turned to Helen. "Does he have any heart conditions? Is he on any medication?" Helen fumbled in her purse, producing a pill bottle with shaking hands. "He takes these for his heart. He had a small attack 2 years ago." Catherine read the label quickly. "Has he taken any today?" "This morning. He's supposed to take another one with dinner." The flight attendant returned with the medical kit and AED. By now, a second flight attendant had joined her. The plane was still shaking, though the intensity of the turbulence had decreased slightly. Catherine opened the medical kit with practiced ease, quickly finding what she needed. She took Robert's pulse again, then placed an oxygen mask over his face. Her movements were confident and efficient, showing years of training that went well beyond basic first aid. "His pulse is rapid but regular," she reported to the flight attendants. "I don't think he's having a heart attack, but he's showing signs of severe anxiety, combined with the beginning stages of hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. The cabin pressure may have fluctuated during the turbulence." The lead flight attendant looked at Catherine with new interest. "Are you a doctor?" "Emergency medical training," Catherine answered vaguely. "Military." The word hung in the air for a moment. The flight attendants exchanged glances. "The captain says we're diverting to Langley Air Force Base," the second flight attendant said. "It's the closest airfield that can accommodate our aircraft. 8 to 20 minutes. Catherine nodded, continuing to monitor Robert's vital signs. The oxygen seemed to be helping. His color was improving and he was becoming more responsive. "Robert," Catherine said clearly, "you're going to be okay. We're landing soon, and there will be medical personnel to help you." The turbulence had lessened considerably now, but the tension in the cabin remained high. Passengers were watching the drama unfold, some with concern, others with the uncomfortable fascination of witnessing a potential tragedy. Catherine remained focused on her patient, occasionally checking his pulse and reassuring Helen. When Robert began to show signs of increased distress, Catherine reached into the medical kit and prepared an injection with quick, practiced movements. "What are you doing?" Helen asked anxiously. "This will help stabilize his condition until we land," Catherine explained, her voice calm and authoritative. "It's a mild sedative that will ease the strain on his heart." The lead flight attendant looked uncertain. "Ma'am, we're not supposed to administer medications without—" "I understand your protocols," Catherine interrupted gently but firmly. "But we're still at least 15 minutes from landing and his condition is deteriorating. This is standard procedure for cardiac distress at altitude." Something in her voice, a certainty that came from experience rather than arrogance, seemed to convince the flight attendant. She nodded and Catherine administered the injection with expert precision. Within minutes, Robert's breathing eased and his pulse stabilized. The relief on Helen's face was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping Catherine's hand. "Are you an angel?" Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown since boarding. "No, Helen, just someone who's been trained for emergencies." The plane began its final approach to Langley Air Force Base, descending through scattered clouds. Catherine remained beside Robert, monitoring his condition. The medication had stabilized him, but she knew he needed proper medical attention soon. Helen clutched her husband's hand, whispering reassurances. "We're landing in 5 minutes," Catherine told her quietly. "There will be medical teams waiting." He'll be in good hands. The lead flight attendant approached, leaning close to speak privately. The captain asked if you could come to the cockpit before we land. He has some questions about the medical emergency. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Is that standard procedure? Not exactly, the flight attendant admitted. But this isn't a standard situation. We're landing at a military installation and the captain thought... She hesitated. Thought what? Catherine prompted. He thought you might have some insights about protocols given your background. Catherine glanced around the cabin. Most passengers were anxiously looking out windows, trying to catch glimpses of the Air Force base below. A few were still watching her with undisguised curiosity. I'll need someone to stay with Robert, she said. I can take over, the flight attendant assured her. I'm trained in basic first aid. Catherine gave her a quick briefing on Robert's condition, then made her way toward the front of the plane. The aircraft was now low enough that the ride had smoothed out, though tension still filled the cabin. As she approached the cockpit, a flight attendant guarding the door gave her a questioning look. The captain requested to see me, Catherine explained. The flight attendant nodded and knocked on the cockpit door. It opened a moment later, and Catherine stepped into the small instrument-filled space. The captain, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, glanced up from his controls. His co-pilot was focused on the landing approach, hands steady on the yoke. You're the passenger who helped with the medical emergency? The captain asked. Yes, Catherine Reynolds. The captain studied her for a moment. My crew says you administered medication and mentioned military medical training. They seemed impressed by your confidence. Catherine met his gaze evenly. The passenger needed immediate assistance. I have the necessary training. I'm sure, the captain said. The reason I asked you up here is that we've been in contact with Langley's tower. Landing a commercial aircraft at a military installation requires special clearance. They're asking for identification information from all crew and passengers. Standard security protocol, Catherine agreed. Yes, but they seemed particularly interested when my flight attendant mentioned a passenger with military medical background who took charge of the situation. The captain paused. They're sending a security team to meet the aircraft. I thought you might want to know. Catherine's expression revealed nothing, but her mind was racing. This trip had been arranged with minimal visibility, deliberately keeping her off military transport. Now she was about to land at one of the most important Air Force bases in the country, her cover already compromised. Thank you for the heads up, Captain, she said. Do you have secure communications with the tower? The captain looked surprised. Yes, we have encrypted channels. May I? Catherine gestured to the radio. The captain hesitated, then nodded to the co-pilot who handed her a headset. Catherine adjusted the frequency with practiced ease, then spoke clearly into the microphone. Langley Tower. This is Catherine Reynolds on inbound commercial flight 2173. Authentication code Sierra 9 Delta 7 Echo 3. Please connect me with Colonel Thomas Parker, base commander. The cockpit fell silent. The captain and co-pilot exchanged glances but kept the plane steady on its approach path. After a long pause, a new voice came through the radio. This is Colonel Parker. Authentication code confirmed. General Reynolds, we weren't expecting you today. The captain's eyes widened at the word general. Change of plans. Colonel? Catherine replied, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority. We have a medical emergency on board. I need an ambulance on the tarmac and medical staff ready to receive a male passenger. Approximately 70 years old. Experiencing cardiac distress. Currently stabilized but requiring immediate attention. Yes, ma'am. Already arranged. And Colonel, I'd appreciate discretion. This was meant to be a low-profile journey. Understood, General. I'll meet you personally. Catherine handed the headset back to the co-pilot, who was staring at her with newfound respect. The captain cleared his throat. General Reynolds, I apologize for not... No apology necessary, Captain, Catherine cut in. You're doing your job. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should return to my patient. As she turned to leave, the captain asked, should I make an announcement about our unusual landing circumstances? Catherine paused at the door. Just tell them we're landing at Langley due to the medical emergency, and that ground transportation will be arranged for continuing journeys. No need to mention anything else. She returned to the main cabin, aware that the dynamics had shifted. The flight attendants watched her with new attentiveness. Even passengers who hadn't witnessed the medical emergency seemed to sense something had changed. Catherine returned to Robert and Helen. The elderly man was awake now, his breathing more regular though his face still showed strain. "We're about to land," Catherine told them. "Medical teams will come aboard first to help you, Robert." Helen looked up gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Catherine replied with genuine warmth. "Just glad I could help." The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach to Langley Air Force Base. We've been cleared for an emergency landing due to our passenger's medical condition. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop and medical personnel have boarded. Ground transportation will be arranged for everyone to continue to your destination." Lynn caught Catherine's eye as she passed by their row. "You're not coming back to your seat?" "Not yet," Catherine answered with a small smile. "I need to help with the landing procedures." The businessman who had been in their row frowned. "Landing procedures? Are you with the airline?" Catherine didn't answer, continuing toward the front of the plane. She joined the flight attendants who were securing the cabin for landing. "We've been instructed to allow medical personnel aboard first," the lead flight attendant told her. "Then security will process passengers before they deplane." "Change of plans," Catherine said quietly. "Medical team first, yes, but there won't be additional security screening. Colonel Parker will handle everything." The flight attendant looked confused but nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The plane descended through the last layer of clouds, revealing Langley Air Force Base spread out below. Several passengers gasped at the sight of F-22 Raptors parked on the tarmac, their sleek forms unmistakable even from a distance. "Are those fighter jets?" Lynn asked nobody in particular, her face pressed against her window. The plane touched down smoothly on the long runway, the thrust reversers engaging with a roar as they rapidly decelerated. Through her window, Catherine could see emergency vehicles waiting, lights flashing. As the aircraft taxied to its designated stopping point, Catherine stepped to the front of the cabin and addressed the passengers, her voice calm but carrying natural authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while medical personnel board to assist our ill passenger. After that, you'll be escorted to transportation that will take you to Washington, D.C. to complete your journey. I apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience during this emergency." The passengers, still processing the unusual landing at a military base, settled back in their seats. Most were just relieved to be safely on the ground after the turbulence. Once the plane stopped completely, Catherine nodded to the flight attendants who opened the main door. A medical team immediately boarded with a stretcher and equipment. Catherine guided them to Robert, giving them a concise briefing on his condition and the medication she had administered. As the medical team worked to transfer Robert to the stretcher, Catherine noticed a tall uniformed man standing at the aircraft door. Colonel Parker was in his late 50s with closely cropped gray hair and the ramrod-straight posture of a career military officer. When Catherine approached him, he saluted sharply. "General Reynolds. Quite the unexpected arrival." "At ease, Colonel," Catherine said, returning the salute more discreetly. "I appreciate your quick response. Your security detail is having fits, ma'am. They've been trying to reach you since they learned about the diversion." Catherine smiled slightly. "I imagine they are. I'll deal with that shortly." Colonel Parker lowered his voice. The secretary called when he heard. "He's concerned about the exposure." "Unavoidable under the circumstances," Catherine replied. "But let's minimize it. I need transportation arranged for all passengers, no questions asked, no delays. And nothing about my presence here goes beyond this base. Already being handled, ma'am." Catherine retrieved her backpack from seat 12F, aware of the hushed conversations and curious stares from the other passengers. Lynn looked up at her with wide eyes as she approached. You're military?" Lynn asked, her voice a mix of awe and confusion. Catherine gave her a small smile. "Yes, I am. But you seemed so. Normal. Most days I am." Catherine shouldered her backpack. "It was nice sitting next to you, Lynn. Good luck with your visit to your aunt." Before Lynn could respond, the lead flight attendant approached. "General Reynolds? Colonel Parker asked me to inform you that your staff is waiting in the base command center. He's arranged for transportation for the other passengers to continue to Washington." Several nearby passengers gasped at the word general. The businessman who had sat in their row looked stunned. "Thank you," Catherine replied. She addressed the cabin one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, Buses will arrive shortly to take you to your destination. Thank you for your cooperation during this emergency. I wish you all a safe journey." With that, Catherine moved toward the exit. As she stepped onto the air stairs, the bright afternoon sun momentarily blinded her. When her vision cleared, she saw a row of Air Force personnel standing at attention at the bottom of the stairs. Behind them, 2 black SUVs waited on the tarmac. Colonel Parker stood at the foot of the stairs. As Catherine descended, he saluted crisply. The entire line of officers followed suit, their movements precise and synchronized. Catherine returned the salute. "At ease," she said, her voice carrying across the tarmac with natural command. "Colonel, a word in private?" "Of course, General." They walked a few paces away from the others. Catherine kept her voice low. "What's the status of the passenger? With the medical emergency?" "Already en route to our medical facility. Initial assessment suggests he'll make a full recovery. Your intervention was timely." "Good. Now, about my presence here." "Classified at the highest level, ma'am. The base is on security protocol Delta 7. No communications about your arrival have gone out." Catherine nodded, satisfied. "I need to get to the Pentagon as soon as possible. Has a helicopter been arranged?" "Standing by on the east pad, fully fueled and ready. Your security detail insisted on accompanying you." Catherine suppressed a sigh. "I imagine they did." A tall woman in a dark suit approached, her expression a mixture of relief and frustration. "General Reynolds, with all due respect, you can't just disappear from secure transport protocols." "Agent Cooper," Catherine acknowledged. "As you can see, circumstances required flexibility. The Secretary of Defense has called 3 times, ma'am. I'll brief him when I reach the Pentagon." Catherine turned back to Colonel Parker. "I need 5 minutes in your command center to make some calls. Then we'll depart immediately." "Yes, ma'am. This way." As they walked toward the base buildings, Catherine noticed a group of F-22 pilots emerging from a hangar. They were in the middle of a conversation when one spotted Catherine and the colonel. The pilot immediately straightened and called out, "Attention!" As one, the pilots snapped to attention, their postures rigid and respectful. The passengers, still deplaning from the commercial aircraft, watched in amazement as the elite fighter pilots stood like statues, eyes forward, awaiting acknowledgement from the woman who, just hours ago, had been an unremarkable passenger in seat 12F. Catherine returned their salute. "As you were, gentlemen." The pilots relaxed but continued to watch her with open respect as she passed. One leaned toward another, whispering something that made the other pilot's eyes widen. Inside the command center, a flurry of activity paused as Catherine entered. Computer screens displayed maps, weather patterns, and aircraft positions. Personnel at various stations looked up, then quickly returned to their tasks with renewed focus. Colonel Parker led her to a private office. "Secure line is ready, General. I'll be outside if you need anything." Once alone, Catherine placed her backpack on the desk and removed a small device from a hidden pocket. She connected it to the secure phone, entered a series of codes, and waited for the encryption to activate. Then she dialed. "Authentication code Sierra 9 Delta 7 Echo 3, she said when the line connected. "Patch me through to SecDef." A moment later, a gruff voice came on the line. "Reynolds, what the hell happened to your travel plans?" "Weather diversion and a medical emergency, sir. Unavoidable. Your cover's blown." "Only partially. The passengers know I'm military, but not my specific role. We can contain this." The Secretary of Defense sighed audibly. "The confirmation hearing is tomorrow morning. The President wants to see you tonight for final briefing. I'll be there in 90 minutes. The Chinese delegation arrived early. They're already asking questions about our position on the South China Sea deployments." "Let them ask," Catherine replied, her voice steady. "Nothing changes in our approach." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who's been fielding calls from nervous allies for the past 6 hours." The Secretary paused. "The Joint Chiefs are divided on your recommendation." "They usually are. That's why the President nominated me. Your predecessor warns that your strategy represents a fundamental shift in our defense posture." "It does," Catherine acknowledged, "one that's long overdue." The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering sensitive matters of national security that had been Catherine's focus for decades. When she finally hung up, she sat back in the chair, allowing herself a moment of reflection. Her journey from a young Air Force Academy cadet to her current position had been long and often difficult. As a woman in the highest echelons of military leadership, she had faced skepticism, resistance, and occasional outright hostility. Yet her strategic mind, calm under pressure, and unwavering integrity had carried her forward. Tomorrow, if confirmed by the Senate, she would become the first female Air Force Chief of Staff, one of the highest military positions in the country. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Colonel Parker entered with a tablet in hand. "Your helicopter is ready, General, and there's something you should see." He handed her the tablet, which showed a social media feed. A passenger from her flight had already posted about the experience. "Our plane just made emergency landing at Air Force Base. Woman who helped sick man turned out to be some high-ranking general. Entire base standing at attention when she got off plane. Most incredible thing I've ever seen. Who is this woman?" The post had already been shared thousands of times, with comments speculating about Catherine's identity. Catherine handed the tablet back. "It was bound to happen. Let's go." Outside, the helicopter's rotors were already turning, creating a steady thrum that Catherine had known most of her adult life. Her security detail waited beside the aircraft, scanning the surroundings with professional vigilance. As she crossed the tarmac, Catherine noticed Lynn and the other passengers boarding buses nearby. Lynn saw her and waved excitedly. Catherine returned the wave with a small smile. Agent Cooper leaned in as they walked. "General, we've received intelligence about a potential security concern at tomorrow's hearing. Nothing concrete but elevated chatter. Increase the security detail but keep it discreet," Catherine instructed. "I won't have a show of force intimidating the committee." "Yes, ma'am." They reached the helicopter, its sleek Black Hawk frame powerful against the late afternoon sky. The pilot, seeing Catherine approach, jumped out and saluted. "General Reynolds, ready when you are, ma'am." Catherine returned the salute. "Let's get moving, Lieutenant." As she prepared to board, Colonel Parker stepped forward with a garment bag.
"Your uniform, General, brought from your quarters as requested." Catherine took the bag with a nod of thanks. The simple blue Air Force service dress contained within represented both her past and her future. 30 years of service culminating in tomorrow's historic confirmation hearing.
The rotor wash whipped around them as Catherine climbed aboard the helicopter. Through the window, she could see the commercial aircraft that had brought her here. An ordinary flight that had turned extraordinary through a chain of unexpected events. As the helicopter lifted off, Catherine gazed down at Langley Air Force Base growing smaller below. Her mind was already shifting to the challenges ahead. The confirmation hearing, the new defense strategy she had developed, the global threats that kept her awake at night. The quiet passenger in seat 12F had disappeared completely now. In her place sat General Catherine Reynolds, poised to become one of the most powerful military leaders in the world. Yet part of her wondered if perhaps the woman from seat 12F, the one who read paperback biographies and calmed nervous seatmates during turbulence, wasn't equally important to who she truly was. The helicopter banked toward Washington, D.C., carrying Catherine toward her destiny in the final act of a journey that had begun long before she ever took seat 12F. The helicopter landed on the Pentagon helipad as dusk was settling over Washington, D.C. Catherine had changed into her uniform during the flight. The crisp blue fabric adorned with the stars of her rank and rows of ribbons that told the story of her 3-decade career. As she stepped onto the pad, a small delegation waited to receive her. "General Reynolds," greeted a silver-haired man in a tailored suit. "The President is waiting." "Thank you, Director Walsh," Catherine replied, falling into step beside him as they entered the building. The Pentagon's corridors hummed with the constant activity of the nation's defense headquarters. Staff members stepped aside respectfully as Catherine passed. Many offered salutes or nods of acknowledgement. The story of her dramatic arrival at Langley had apparently traveled faster than her helicopter. "Your unscheduled landing has caused quite a stir," Walsh commented as they walked. "It's trending on social media." "So I've heard." The White House press team is asking how to respond. Catherine kept her pace steady. Tell them to issue the standard no comment on security protocols statement. By tomorrow evening, it won't matter anyway. They reached a secure elevator that required both retinal and fingerprint scans. As they descended to one of the Pentagon's classified levels, Walsh updated her on developments during her flight. The Joint Chiefs are assembled in the tank. They've been reviewing your strategic assessment. Admiral Hayes still has reservations about the Pacific reallocation. Hayes always has reservations about change, Catherine replied. He'll come around once he sees the full implementation plan. The elevator doors opened onto a heavily guarded corridor. At the end, 2 Marine sentries stood at attention outside a reinforced door marked simply Conference Alpha. They saluted crisply as Catherine approached. At ease, she said, returning their salute before entering the room. Inside, the most powerful military leaders in the nation rose to their feet. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, the heads of each branch of the armed services, stood around a massive table covered with maps and documents. Screens on the walls displayed global tactical information, threat assessments, and deployment statuses. General Reynolds, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, greeted her. Quite an entrance you made today. Not exactly how I planned to arrive, Admiral, Catherine replied with the hint of a smile. But the circumstances required adaptation. A quality you've never lacked, observed an older general with 4 stars on his shoulders. Though some might call it improvisation. Results matter more than methods, General Hernandez, Catherine countered, taking her seat at the table. Now where do we stand on the briefing for tomorrow? For the next hour, Catherine led a discussion on national defense strategy that revealed both her mastery of global military operations and her distinctive approach to leadership. She listened more than she spoke, asked incisive questions, and demonstrated a remarkable ability to synthesize complex information into clear directives. As the meeting concluded, the chairman pulled her aside. The president expects you at the White House in 30 minutes. Cars waiting topside. Thank you, Admiral. Catherine gathered her materials, but before she could leave, General Hernandez approached her. As the outgoing Air Force Chief of Staff, the position she was nominated to fill, his opinion carried particular weight. Catherine, he said, using her first name now that they were relatively alone. That flight today, it might come up in the hearing. I expect it will. Senator Whitfield will use it to question your judgment, taking a commercial flight instead of military transport, putting yourself in a position where your identity could be compromised. Catherine met his gaze steadily. The flight was approved through proper channels. Sometimes the best way to understand the people we serve is to sit among them. Hernandez studied her for a moment, then nodded. 30 years ago, I would have said you'd never make it past Colonel. Too unconventional. Too willing to buck tradition. A rare smile crossed his face. I've never been happier to be wrong. High praise coming from you. You're going to change things, Catherine. More than I did. More than anyone has in a long time. He extended his hand. The Air Force will be in good hands. Their handshake was firm, a passing of the torch that had been decades in the making. Later that evening, after her briefing with the president, Catherine returned to her Georgetown townhouse. The modest home reflected her personality. Practical, elegant in an understated way, with bookshelves lining most walls. Military memorabilia shared space with family photos and artifacts from her travels around the world. Catherine changed into casual clothes and poured herself a small glass of bourbon. She was reviewing her notes for tomorrow's hearing when her phone rang. General Reynolds, she answered. General, this is Dr. Peterson from Langley Medical. I wanted to update you on Robert Wilson's condition. Catherine set down her notes. How is he? Stable and improving. The stress of the flight and turbulence triggered a severe anxiety attack that mimicked cardiac symptoms, complicated by some altitude-related issues. Your intervention was crucial. His wife asked me to convey their deepest thanks. I'm glad to hear he's recovering. There's something else, ma'am. A young woman has been calling repeatedly asking about you. Says she sat next to you on the flight. Lin Chen? Catherine smiled, remembering the curious college student who had been her seatmate. What did you tell her? Only that her message would be passed along. She's quite persistent. Says she wants to thank you personally. After ending the call, Catherine stood by the window looking out at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. Tomorrow would bring the scrutiny of a Senate confirmation hearing, where every aspect of her career and character would be examined. The incident on Flight 2173 would undoubtedly come up, presented either as evidence of her hands-on leadership or as a security lapse, depending on which senator was asking. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Catherine arrived at the Capitol early, her uniform immaculate, her composure absolute. Security was visibly heightened, with plainclothes agents positioned throughout the building, a response to the intelligence about a potential threat. As she waited in a small antechamber for the hearing to begin, Catherine reviewed her opening statement one last time. A staff aide approached with a tablet. "General, I thought you might want to see this." The tablet displayed a news article with the headline, "Mystery General from Flight 2173 revealed Catherine Reynolds, nominated as first female Air Force Chief of Staff." Below was a photo someone had taken of her at Langley, along with details about her career and statements from former colleagues praising her leadership. Further down was a quote from Robert Wilson, the passenger she had helped. "She saved my life without hesitation, then went right back to saving our country. That's who I want leading our military." Catherine handed the tablet back with a nod of thanks. A moment later, her security detail appeared. "It's time, General." The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room was packed with journalists, military personnel, politicians, and members of the public. As Catherine entered, all rose to their feet, a sign of respect that transcended political differences. She took her seat at the witness table, facing the semicircle of senators who would question her. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. The committee chairman gavelled the session to order. "This committee meets today to consider the nomination of General Catherine Reynolds for the position of Air Force Chief of Staff." The chairman adjusted his glasses. "General, we understand you had quite an eventful journey to Washington yesterday." A murmur of laughter rippled through the room, breaking the tension. "Yes, Mr. Chairman," Catherine replied, "though not quite what I had planned. Would you tell the committee why you were on a commercial flight rather than military transport?" Catherine leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Mr. Chairman, throughout my career, I've found that leadership requires understanding the people you serve. Occasionally, stepping outside the military bubble helps maintain that perspective." The questioning continued for hours, covering military strategy, global threats, personnel policies, and budget priorities. Catherine answered with clarity and conviction, demonstrating both technical expertise and strategic vision. Late in the afternoon, Senator Whitfield, known for his aggressive questioning, leaned forward. "General Reynolds, yesterday on Flight 2173, you revealed your identity during an emergency landing. Some might consider this a security breach. How do you respond?" The room grew quiet. "Senator, when that flight diverted to Langley, we had a passenger requiring immediate medical attention. The security protocols exist to protect our nation's interests, not to prioritize anonymity over human life." Catherine's voice was measured but firm. "If saving that passenger's life meant revealing my identity, I would make the same choice every time."